Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's live stream, where we're going to be going over core strength without endless crunches. Now, before I do get started with this topic and discussion, I do want to mention a few things. If you're not aware and this is your first time listening to the stream, I do want to mention that, of course, I do have a website, which is bponlinefitness.com. There's a ton of information on there that you can check out that's free for you to access. I have a fitness blog on there. I also have a way for you to sign up to my email list. I usually send out an email every Monday as far as the email newsletter. And then I also send out reminders of any upcoming streams, usually, as well as any promotions that I'm offering and discounts on online fitness coaching. So there's a ton of information on there. It's not just, that in itself. There's just a ton of resources that you can make use of, information that can, help you with your routine. That's free for you to access. I have a blog on there. And again, the email list is, of course, something else that you can sign up to and you can receive that. There's free information that I always send out in there. Um, and another thing too, I do want to mention is that each of these live streams get archived. So when I do these live streams, they're always archived to YouTube. So if you do miss any of the streams that I do, you can watch them live on there. So a few other things to mention. If you're not aware, every Tuesday I do TikTok live streams at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. Normally, I have been doing X Spaces discussions. They've not been doing well, unfortunately. Um, so for the time being, I'm not doing them on Thursdays at the moment. So I'm still kind of deciding there. I may switch and do streams on Substack, but I'm trying to find a sort of a better platform that, I can get a little bit more exposure on my content. Um, my X profile does get decent traction, but it seems like the Spaces is not doing well. So I'm trying to figure out what to do there, and I may switch up what live streams are, I do on those Thursdays. But keep in mind that the TikTok streams I will be doing Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and then I'm still doing these Facebook streams Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. So I just wanted to mention that all in advance. So let's go ahead and get going with this topic on core strength without endless crunches. So in this topic, one thing that I do want to clarify as we sort of get going is that training the core is more than just focusing on really the aspect of, just really like engaging the core itself is more than just building the physique and the six pack, is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of people really associate the core with that aspect, and that it's only that, central concept that it benefits. But core strength is a little bit more beyond just, of course, the crunches themselves, but core strength is more about helping to build the foundational part of your body. The core is a crucial muscle to train, and it is a muscle you should be training consistently in your routine. So there's a bunch of different topics that we're going to sort of touch on as we go through this presentation, and these are just a, a small portion of them. There's a few points that I'll go over more, but the first, of course, I want to mention is the real job of the core. We're going to start with that. We're going to go over why crunches alone don't build functional strength, and I'll explain exactly what it means when we're talking about functional strength itself, as well as going over the big anti-movement categories explained. I will explain again what that means and what those movements can benefit in your workout routine. I will go over the difference between bracing versus hollowing. This is another, concept of core training as well. And I'll also go over how to strengthen your core through compound movements. If you listen to me before, compound movements is something that I've discussed time and time and again because it is an important, you know, it's these are important workouts that you should master in your workout routine in order to see progress, not only in the aspect of building overall strength, but building that core strength as well. So let's go ahead and move forward and talk about the real job of the core. So, like I mentioned, the core is more than just engaging, or trying to build a six pack. There's a lot of different things that the core does in order to help with more efficient movement in your workouts. The first point is that the core protects your spine. So the core functions as a 360-degree stabilizer. It is what's helping to stabilize your body as you are performing workouts. It also creates intra-abdominal pressure to keep the spine neutral. Of course, that means keeping your spine upright in a position to where it's not bending excessively. It also reduces stress on the lower back during every lift and daily movement. So, touching on the aspect of compound movements just for a moment here. So, this is a big one. We're talking about the lower back because the lower back is extremely prone to injury. It's one of the parts of the body that it's just more prone than other parts. It's a more sensitive area of the body. So, when you're thinking about, engaging the core and you're developing that core, it's creating and reducing, you know, it's reducing that stress that is happening upon the muscles of the lower back because you're strengthening that foundational part of the body. It's in turn going to help with you being able to really manage controlling that lower back muscle in that lower back area. Another thing too is that the core itself helps to transfer power efficiently. So like I mentioned, the core is a foundational part of the body. A lot of our movement is transferred through this. So when we're performing workouts, our core is being engaged in multiple different ways. So it acts as a bridge between upper and lower body base workouts. It also, of course, when we're talking about a strong core, it's helping with when we perform compound based movements. So, for example, again, like squats, deadlifts, and presses, when we're performing those types of movements, it's going to help to really make us move more efficiently in those particular exercises. Of course, it also helps you generate, absorb, and redirect force safely. So you're able to sort of, you know, uh, with your movements in your workouts, you're able to move in a more fluid manner with those workouts. It is also helping to resist unwanted movement. So core strength is mostly about anti-rotational and anti-flexion as well as anti-extension. Now, just because these are known as anti does not mean they're bad. When we're able to control and prevent those unwanted movements, it really helps with how we efficiently perform our workouts. It keeps your torso solid during rows, carries, lunges, and athletic tasks. So, like when we're talking about rows, the main thing you want to think about is you don't want to have a lot of excessive leaning with those workouts because we're trying to engage the back. When we focus on not having a ton of rotation, it's going to help us engage that back more, just to give you an example of the rows themselves. The same with lunges. With lunges, of course, you're stepping forward, but you don't want to rotate. You don't want to have a lot of flexion and extension in a lunge because we're focusing on engaging those muscles of the legs. We're focusing on primarily the quads. And when we have flexion and sort of those unwanted movements, it's changing the muscle that is being engaged. So you're less effectively engaging the muscle. Again, like for the legs, the lunges, you're less effectively engaging those when you're only focusing on, or when you're when your movement is like off balance and when you're doing a lot of flexion, a lot of rotation, it's not helping with how you perform that workout. So the main thing you need to think about with the core is that the core is all about stability. It's really helping to keep your body stable. Again, it's protecting your spine. It's helping you transfer that force. So like when we're doing lifts, when we're doing any kind of movement, it's helping us to do those movements more efficiently when we engage the core, of course, in our main movements like squats and any other movement like presses. When we're engaging that core, it's keeping us stable. And it's not only about engaging the core when we're talking about, again, just like crunches and things of that nature. It's also how we engage that core in compound movements like squats and all of those other movements as well. So, as we're continuing on here, what I want to discuss next is why crunches alone don't build functional strength. Now, I do want to clarify what it means when we're talking about functional strength. So, functional strength is more about basically how our body is able to, how we're building strength with daily movements. So, to put it in better terms, when we're talking about, functional movement, this is like when you're doing any kind of daily activity, whether you're working, whether you're, when you're doing anything around the house, functional movement is basically the movement that allows you to perform day-to-day tasks, to make it in simple terms. So when you are engaging the core, when you're doing exercises that emphasize a little bit of engagement in that core, you are helping to perform other, not only improving in your workouts, but also improving in your movements in day-to-day life. So again, what we're talking about is that it's not just about crunches, it's how we engage the core outside of that. So crunches themselves train movement and not stability. So crunches, what they do is they flex the spine. Functional strength, again, keep in mind functional strength is how you can efficiently perform day-to-day movements. So this requires resisting movement and not creating it. So like what I talked about previously, you know, with a lot of, core movements and when we're engaging the core and the abdominals, what we're focusing on is not a lot of rotation. Now, of course, you do have exercises like when you target the obliques, which is the side portion of the core, you do have those workouts that, like Russian twists where you're alternating. But most of the time when we're thinking about the core itself, we're not doing a ton of rotational movement. So the core's real job is to help sort of preventing that sort of anti-rotation, anti-extension, anti-flexion sort of movement. So keep that in mind. Another thing too is that, of course, crunches only target the front of the core. There's various portions of the core. A lot of people automatically think of the six pack itself, but there's, like I mentioned, the obliques is the side portion. You've got the transverse abdominis. You've got so many of these other muscles that are involved in, the core that we don't really think about them. So there's a lot of overemphasis on the rectus abdominis, which is another muscle of the core. And again, we're forgetting all these other muscles. So like I mentioned, the obliques is the side portion of your core. You've got the transverse abdominis, which is another portion of your core. Your deep stabilizers, where you're going, sort of lower into the core muscles. So you have to keep in mind that you have to have, of course, a well-rounded, core routine in order, of course, to develop it more effectively to help with building that strength. So again, functional strength needs 360-degree engagement. So like with any workout you do, the core, it's no different. You have to have a balanced routine in how you approach it. So like what I've mentioned, like for example, when we're training the lower body and we're training the legs, we want to have a well-developed or well-rounded routine where we're focusing on the quads, we're focusing on the hamstrings, the glutes, the calves, abductors, adductors when needed. we're focusing on all of those, targeting all of those individual muscles. And the way that we do them is in different ways, where we may do compound movements that will engage them all at once, or maybe we're wanting to build strength in a specific muscle a little bit more, and we focus on oscillation and building strength and that sort of aspect. So going back to the core itself, this is the same concept where when you're training, the core, you want to make sure that you're having a well-rounded routine where we're not just focusing on one specific portion of the core, but the entire core. So as we continue on here, keep in mind that crunches don't transfer well to real lifts. So squats, deadlifts, and presses rely on bracing and pressure and not flexion. So when we're thinking of crunches, it's mostly flexion, and there's not a lot of, bracing. And the term bracing your core is probably something that you've heard a ton of times if you watched any sort of workout videos. What that means in bracing the core, the way that I like to describe it is sort of like it's like when you're like preparing for a punch. In other words, like it's kind of like flinching, I guess you would say, in another term, but it's where you're not sucking your stomach in. You're kind of flexing that core, sort of in other terms. So you're kind of bracing it and you're preparing like to get hit from a punch is the way that I can describe it the best to sort of understand what kind of how you want to engage the core, how that works. So a strong midsection must stabilize under load. So when you have, that strong core, again, it's helping with keeping your movements, really efficient, keeping those movements stable, and especially too, if you think about doing heavier lifting and weightlifting, you need to build that core. Like you need to start from the beginning and really build that core so that when you're getting into those heavier movements, it's going to benefit you more because again, like what I mentioned, the core is all about transferring force between the body and your movements. So the more that you start sooner with engaging the core, the more it's going to be so much easier for you to perform workouts that may require heavier weights. So just keep that in mind. Again, crunches don't replicate to real world demands. So again, this is the same concept here, where you kind of have to have a well-rounded, you know, routine in how you develop the core itself. So as we're continuing on here, I want to go over the big anti-movement categories explained. So, like I mentioned, of course, there's different sort of anti-movements. So with the core, what our main emphasis is sort of preventing these unwanted movements. So the first movement here is your anti-rotation. So this is resisting those twisting sort of forces. So like, for example, like what we were mentioning with lunges. With lunges, you don't want to do a lot of twisting. There are some workouts that involve twisting with lunges, and those are a little bit different, where as they're targeting, a specific, like you're kind of engaging both the legs and the core at the same time. But when we're talking about a normal lunge, what we're focusing on is really emphasizing the legs themselves. We're not focusing so much on, any other muscle. We're focusing on the lower body. However, our core does need to be engaged when we're doing that so that it keeps us stable. So that's what I'm trying to mention here is that when we're talking about anti-rotation, when we have that strong core and we're doing the lunges, that's what's really helping to more isolate the muscles we want to work. So the first anti-movement category is anti-rotation. So this is your body's ability to stay stable without something when something tries to twist you. So with lunges, like what I mentioned, that's a good example of a twisting that can happen. That can easily happen with a lunge if you're not engaging your core properly. So again, when we're training our core enough, it's going to really help with that, type of exercise. So another one would be anti-lateral flexion. So this is resisting side bending. So when we're bending over to the side. So this is the ability to stay tall and upright when weight tries to pull you to one side. So when you think of like like with side bends, that kind of is that same sort of concept where you're kind of training your body in that way when you're doing side bends to sort of prevent that type of movement happening. So there may be some people that don't really, have that effect to where they bend to the side, but if you do, there's ways that you can sort of train that to prevent that movement. And of course, when you train the core enough, like when I like talking about the obliques, like I mentioned with the obliques, which is the side portion of your core, like with brush and twist, when you're doing those, that's targeting primarily the obliques of the abs and the core muscles. So when you're training those obliques, that also is going to prevent, that side movement that's going to happen. So number three here is anti-extension. So this is resisting arching of the lower back. This is an important one, like I mentioned with deadlifts. So again, this is anti-extension. This is your ability to prevent your lower back from arching excessively. The most important exercise, of course, is the deadlifts with this one. And the reason being is that a lot of people tend to try to bend too far forward when they're doing deadlifts. So the way that you prevent this, of course, is engaging the core. But as you're really doing that workout, when you engage the core enough, it's going to prevent, that excessive arching that you may have in your lower back. So again, when you train the core and you're, engaging all of the portions of the core, not just the abs themselves, but every, portion of the body, it's going to help when you're going into those different lifts. This is not just abs themselves. This is beyond that. This is all about how, engaging these muscles is going to transfer into any other exercise that you perform. So I'm just trying to emphasize that enough because it's more than, what a lot of people associate it with. So bracing versus hollowing, I should say. So there are exercises that have two different tops usually when we're thinking of core workouts, and this is bracing and hollowing. So with bracing, this is a workout again, or this not a workout, but it's a sort of movement that you do. Bracing the core, that's what we're talking about here. So bracing the core is what you're going to hear a lot of times when you're focusing on, form in pretty much any workout. A lot of times you'll hear me in some of the videos that I do where I mention that you need to brace your core for this workout, and that's that's what that means. That means, of course, like I mentioned before, is like you're preparing for a punch. Before you're doing that workout, kind of, engage that core so that it keeps you stable as you perform the workouts. So when you create this 360-degree tension around the core by expanding the abs, ribs, and lower back, again, like preparing for a punch, what happens is this increases that intra-abdominal pressure. It's going to stabilize the spine as well, and it's engaging the deep core muscles known as the TVA and the obliques, the diaphragm, and the pelvic floor muscles. So again, it's not just the abdominals. When you're doing this, you're protecting all of these. You're stabilizing your spine, and you're also protecting your lower back when you're doing this before you get started with your movement. And when we're talking about hollowing, so hollowing is another movement that can happen. And there are abdominal workouts that are known as hollow holds. And basically, what those workouts are is, like, for example, if you've seen a V up, so basically a V up is almost like your legs are basically like, for example, you've got your arms up and your legs, kind of down, and you're kind of bringing them together when you're doing the V ups. So it's almost in that way, except what you're doing is you're holding your body in that sort of V position, if that makes sense. So that's basically what a hollow is where you're kind of, you're drawing the belly button inward and you're pulling the abs in, but you're kind of holding that position and that's what a hollow is. If you look up the exercise known as a hollow hold, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Or it's basically you're kind of holding that position in that workout. So what happens with this is this reduces abdominal stability. It can decrease intra-abdominal pressure and such off the global core muscles. Now, even though I'm saying what you shouldn't rely on, there are exercises that are hollow based exercises. But what we're talking about here is that you don't want to emphasize this when we're talking about exercises like, any other abdominal workout. There are exercises that are beneficial, like with the hollow holds, you're not really doing movement. You're kind of holding that movement for a certain period of time. So you're really just engaging the core and keeping yourself stable. So there's not really movement happening there. But when you're doing like a hollow and you're drawing too far in with the abs, and when you're doing other ab workouts, if that makes sense, that's when there's sort of a problem. So just know that there are workouts that are hollow based. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. So, how to strengthen the core through compound movements? So, again, compound movements are movements that involve multiple muscles. So, for example, like what I mentioned, compound movements include the squats, the deadlifts, they can include chest presses. There's a lot of muscles that are being engaged when we're doing these workouts. So, key benefits is building functional strength. Again, functional strength is how you're able to, perform workouts, or not just perform workouts, but how you do day-to-day tasks. It also improves posture and alignment in the body, enhances bracing and stability, strengthens deep core muscles, which is the TVA, transverse abdominis, obliques, erectors, all of those different muscles. It also boosts athleticism and everyday movement. Same, very similar to functional strength, of course, and makes you stronger in all lifts. Again, that emphasis on all movements. The core, when you engage the core, it's not just about that itself. It's a foundational part of the body that helps with every other workout. So compound movements that build the core strength naturally. So even though we're not doing a workout that is actually, like we're training the core for that day, when we do workouts like squats, deadlifts, and overhead presses, all of these workouts are using the core. You have to stabilize your core in order for these workouts to be more effective. So, squats, this could be front squats, back squats, or goblet squats. I've performed all of these workouts in some of my videos, and the front squats, to clarify a little bit about what these movements are. So, for example, with a front squat, basically with a front squat, if you're using a dumbbell, you're basically having the dumbbells kind of up in sort of a like kind of like a racked position. With the back squats, what you're doing is that you're having the dumbbells to your sides with a normal, basically that's a normal squat. And the same like with the Smith machine, with the back squat, you're having the bar behind you. With a front squat, the bar is sort of on your shoulder in front of you. The goblet squat is where you're holding one dumbbell and you're kind of cupping it at the top and you're squatting. So, just to clarify what those are. So, the core resists forward collapse and maintains spinal alignment. So, when you think of a squat, of course, you want to make sure that you stay upright through the movement. You don't want to bend forward, you don't want to bend back, you don't want to have a side bend. We're focusing on lowering our body straight down. We're focusing on engaging the quads, the glutes, the hamstrings, all in that, one movement. So deadlifts, another one that's very important. So you have the RDLs, which is known as the Romanian deadlifts, which basically they're not too different from your conventional deadlift. So a RDL deadlift is basically where you are going through a fluid movement. So a lot of times when you see the deadlift, like when we're talking about barbell, basically with a deadlift, what happens is that with that barbell, you go straight down and the bar hits the floor. But when you're talking about RDL, it's different, where the bar is you're kind of going through fluid movement. You're still doing a deadlift, but you're not dropping the bar. That's the way I like to describe the difference between those. It's pretty much the same movement. You're just kind of going through it fluidly rather than dropping the bar and then coming back up. So, just to clarify what that means. A sumo deadlift is basically it's the same as a deadlift. The only difference is your legs are farther apart. That's pretty much the big difference where you're having your legs pointed out. Like with sumo squats, that's what the sumo based movements are, is that your legs are farther apart. They're farther than shoulder width apart, and you have the legs pointed out. So that's what that means when we're talking about sumo squats. So the core itself stabilizes the lumbar spine and controls hinge mechanics. So when we're thinking of deadlifts, you're not doing a squat, you're hinging with those movements. So there's a lot of hinging when we're doing deadlifts. So when we train the core, it's allowing us to control that hinge movement when we're bringing, the weight down and of course engaging the hamstrings. Keep in mind that the deadlift itself targets the hamstrings, the under portion of the legs. So overhead press, this is more of a shoulder based movement. So this could be dumbbell or barbell. And with this, you want to have the core resist extension also while keeping the ribs down under load. So with overhead presses, this is very important, especially when you're doing anything that's overhead. You don't want to have any kind of twisting. So like when we're doing like an overhead shoulder press, you're kind of coming up, you have those weights to your side and you're coming up, and it's easy if you don't engage your core to kind of twist. So this is kind of an example where you want to resist that extension when you're doing that. You don't want to kind of twist when you're doing that type of workout because it's going to affect what muscles are going to be engaged. So the next point here is the rows and the pulls. So like this could be bent over rows. This could be your normal cable rows where you're pulling forward. Anything like that, any kind of pull based movement, those are all another thing to keep in mind to sort of prevent that rotation, where these can be more susceptible to that rotation that you don't want to happen. So when you engage the core, this prevents that rotation and it maintains a rib and hip alignment. So you're keeping a proper alignment in your body. When you, again, when you train the core enough, these are all the benefits that are going to happen, when you're doing more of these compound movements and you're training the core, in conjunction with that, it's going to help make all of your movements more efficient. All right, guys. So I know that's a lot of stuff there, but I really appreciate your time. If you guys have any questions about anything that I've discussed today on this stream, feel free to let me know. You can again visit bponlinefitness.com for more information on online fitness coaching and, of course, the free fitness resources that I have on there. Again, guys, I will have another stream next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I really look forward to sharing that topic with you guys soon. I'll have that posted likely by the end of the week. I usually get the new event posted for the next stream. And then I'll usually send out a reminder on when that stream is happening, usually the day before on Tuesday, so that you're aware if you do want to watch. Again, guys, if you do miss any of these are all archived on my YouTube channel. So if you do want the link to my YouTube channel to check out all the other streams I've done, feel free to let me know. Um, as far as everything else, I think that's pretty much it of what I wanted to mention here. I've got fitness spelled wrong here on the screen, but you know what I'm talking about. But yeah, you can go to bponlinefitness.com. Again, guys, just reach out if you have any questions, and you're interested in learning more about online fitness coaching. If you do have a topic too that you would like me to discuss at all, feel free to let me know and I could go over that. But thank you guys again. I really appreciate it. I'm always willing to help you guys in any way possible and take this advice, and use it. This is not just, this is all practical advice that can be used and it's available for you to, access. So, make the most of this advice, and I think it'll be very beneficial. This isn't really just for beginners, it can be for anybody. So, thank you guys once again. I will see you guys next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time in the next live stream. So, I hope you guys have a great rest of your Wednesday.